Cool, everybody. Coach Rab here, and welcome to another Kilted Chess Noob episode. No, I'm not a chess coach, not even close. I'm a health and wellness coach that happens to love chess, and I'm using this channel to showcase my journey from returning to chess with very limited knowledge to hopefully getting better and being able to play some games semi-competitively. That's the goal anyway, and I'm enjoying the journey regardless. Now, today's episode is all about laws of attraction, the attraction technique. In previous videos, if you've been following the journey, I've mentioned that in chess, for those that don't know, there's a bunch of different tactics that you want to employ. There's like forks, there's pins, discovered checks, all these sort of good stuff. And one of the tactics is either removing the guard or sort of attraction. I can't remember how exactly they word it. Removing the guard and attraction, they're kind of an overlap. With my limited knowledge, I think it becomes attraction when it involves the king, I believe. But regardless, I'm going to showcase here what happened, or I'll showcase roughly what I mean in a very similar format. I just threw some pieces together on a board. Probably wouldn't have. I don't even know if this position is entirely all that possible. Probably is. But then I'll showcase how that played out in a game and how I used that to win a game recently. So basically, so I'll take you to the board. The attraction technique from here is right now, if we just look at here, the queen is on the rook. Now, there's probably other faster ways to checkmate the king here, right? But I just want to showcase what the attraction is. The attraction technique would be moving the rook in, which puts the king in check, and then the king would then take, and it then creates the gap, which allows the queen to take. So it pulled, it attracted the king away and allowed then the queen to step in. Now, that's as basic a explanation as I can. Now, it happens in lots of different formats. It doesn't always have to involve rooks and queens in the process. Other pieces can do it too. But the concept is the same. You're pulling a piece over, you're drawing it into position, and it allows you to then, get what you need to do. Where it also comes into effect is usually when the king's in the corner. Sometimes you sacrifice a rook to take the pawn, the king takes, and then you can slide your other rook across, and the king's then in the firing line. And there's lots of ways to do it, but it's about understanding that you basically sacrifice a piece, unless it's an equal trade, but regardless, to pull the piece across that allows you to then get in. Now, you could argue that this was also removing the guard because the king was previously guarding the rook. So I'm also removing the guard by forcing them to move. Now, I think technically removing the guard is when you take the piece that's guarding, but it still attracted the guard away and allowed it to get in. So I'm going to showcase, this was a game that I played, and I'll go right back to the start. So this was a game I was playing in the tournament format against a player of very similar level to myself, which was quite good. I've recently been learning the Alpin Sicilian opening for white as a counter to the Sicilian, and lo and behold, my opponent played, when after I played e4, they pulled their c-pawn forward, which then brings, that's the Sicilian defense as black, and my Alpin Sicilian is the counter to that. So I was like, oh great, I'll get to try it out. The problem is, I've only really practiced chapter 1 of the Alpin Sicilian. I know the basic, and at this point I wasn't even that well versed in chapter 1, so I was like, okay, I'll use what I know, and then I'll play chess for the rest, because that's it. If you don't want to be glued to your opening, you just want to play sensible chess if there's no clear. So this set up for the Alpin Sicilian, where I push the c-pawn, and again I'm pushing the c-pawn to then pre-activate the d-pawn afterwards. They brought their knight out. This was stuff that I actually had drilled. Then I pushed the d-pawn. Now, everything I drilled in chapter 1 when I'm learning this, their pawn takes. Now, obviously, in subsequent chapters, I'm obviously exploring didn't. But in the case of my opponent didn't take. They pushed the g-pawn. So I was like, well, this is different. So again, I'm sure as my learning process goes on, I'll probably learn how to deal with that. But at the time, I thought, well, I'll just push the pawn to put pressure on their knight. They jumped back, and then from that point onwards, I was like, well, I'll just play chess. I'll just develop. Brought knight out. He pulled his bishop in to get eyes across. I thought that was coming anyway. I defended the pawn up here again, and he brought the knight out. Now, this was a move, I don't know, at the time, like, this was a daily tournament, so there was quite a lot of games running at once, and at the time, I thought this move was like, yes, And after I played it and I went away thinking about it, and I was like, oh, I don't think that was a good move. And when I got to game review, I found out it was not a good move. So I moved the knight in here. I can't remember what it was I was trying to plan at the time. I didn't know if I was going to, I think I was planning to push the pawn, and then I was going to have, you know, eyes on here or whatever, but who knows. It wasn't a great move. The engine didn't like that either. My opponent castled, and then I think I double... No, I didn't double down then. I went for the strange pawn structure. I thought, right, just reinforce this centre. They pushed the pawn forward. I castled. They pushed the wide pawn. I've protected against, just watching what was potentially coming here. I thought he was going to jump in, so you push. He brought his bishop out. At some point, I reinforced this knight. Now, the reason I knew this knight was a problem, I was waiting on this pawn coming. I was like, but I thought I'll just deal with it when I can. And I'd already locked my knight's natural escape square, so I was like, this is not going to be great. And again, if I escaped here, you know, the bishop could take, the bishop could take, and I'd have to expose my king. So it wasn't a great position, but luckily my opponent didn't quite spot it. My opponent pulled the bishop in there, and when that happened, I thought I was pretty sure that was a mistake. So I doubled down on it and reinforced my knight. Engine doesn't like that, but at the time I thought it was the best thing I could do. But anyway, I'm waffling, but I'll get to the point. So I had a bunch of exchanges, everything moving around, pushed up the pawn, kicked out the knight. I think I make another, push the pawn here was fine. I'm pretty sure I make a boo-boo sometime soon because he double knights me. And he actually pre-moved. I don't know how to do that on chess.com. But he pre-moved, and this was in a daily game. So I was like, I played it, and he just jump, you know, pre-moved. It was kind of cool to watch, actually. He brought his bishop out there. I brought my queen to the middle. He brought his bishop in. I took. This was it. This is when he double moved me. So he put me in check, and I had to obviously push forward, and then he jumped up and gobbled that pawn, which also put my queen in danger as well. So I pulled the queen back, pushed the pawn. I pushed up, got a nice pawn chain up here, and then pulled his bishop back. I pushed forward, lots of exchanges here. Boom, boom, boom. And then I think it's here. So we set up at this point here. I recognised that he was quite boxed in. His king was boxed in the corner. When he moved his knight, he'd removed the other defender for this piece here. Because when the knight was there, it was defending as well as the king. And I realised, okay, there might be a weakness down there. So I brought the rook across at that point. Engine wanted me to do the queen, but I wasn't quite ready to do that yet. I think that was my follow-up move that I was originally planning. He pushed his king forward. And then from there, I took the pawn. He recaptured with his queen. I brought my pawn forward. He pulled his queen back. I gobbled his knight, which he then captured with his rook. Now, this is when I pushed the queen forward. Now we were in this position. This was similar. This is why I set up that other one as close as I could get to this. So this was the position I was looking for, and I spotted that here. I want to take this rook, but I can't because his king will get me. But I realised that if I sacked my rook here, okay, if the rook comes up and takes that pawn, it would pull his king away and I would get in with check. Now, in terms of the follow-ups after that, I was thinking, right, we'll need to bring the knight into play. And I was trying to work out where to put my bishop. I think I was originally considering going up here with the bishop because I wanted to then bring the second rook across. I was very wary of his queens and I didn't know what he was going to do. He then pulled his queen down. So his queen was up on b7 and he pulled it down, which it recognises an error. I remember when that happened. I remember when you're playing these games, we're not very high level. You know, my opponent's a 1200 and I'm a 1300. You know, we're not very, very high level. So these kind of things happen. But I remember when that move occurred, I thought to myself, there was nothing I was concerned about because this pawn was covered by the knight. The knight was protected by the bishop. There was nothing I was really that concerned with. The only main concern was that if he did take, it'd be a check and I'd be then forced to take, you know, in terms of force to move. But other than that, it was protected. He would have lost a queen. So this set up my attraction technique where I then threw my rook into check. So he has to deal with that. He could have run up the way, but if he'd run up the way, the queen would have just taken it. It would have been protected by the rook anyway. So he kind of had to take there. So he took, then I threw in the check there and he ran up. So from this point, I have the king in the corner. And I was like, right, I don't want to mess this up now because he's in a very vulnerable position. He cannot escape now, you know, because my queen's covering all his escape squares. So I knew, right, I need to bring this knight into play. I wasn't sure what my opponent was going to do. These things were covered, but I was just watching. I didn't know if he was maybe going to then take on the pawn. I had to just try and find out. I moved my knight. He opened up his rook to try and bring that to the game. I managed to put his queen in a bit of threat, and it was protected by a knight. But again, he could have taken said pawn. There's nothing I could have done with it. But it wouldn't matter anyway, because although he brought in to put my queen in danger, the very last move I needed was to bring the rook across, create a check. There's nothing to block. Game's a bogey. Checkmate. So that particular tactic, the sort of attraction technique, and it's also called removing the guard, in the sense that the guard, the king was also guarding that rook. So in a way, whilst I pulled that guard away, I was then able to take the rook undefended, because it was undefended. So that's removing the guard / attraction technique. There's quite a lot of overlap with those two, but it's a really, really good tactic. It's quite hard to spot. I'll be honest, it's easier to spot with rooks, in my opinion. There goes the door. Darkness. It's sometimes easier to spot with rooks, I find, because they then just work off straight lines. But there are other situations where, you can make use of your bishops, and you could probably even sack your queen in some situations to gain the same method, to get the same thing. So it's a real sacrifice, puts their king in danger and allows you to then get checkmate. And I used it to get the win in this game, which was very lucky, because in a lot of ways I wasn't in familiar territory. I was moving and making mistakes left, right, and centre. Luckily, my opponent was also making a similar number of mistakes. I just got jammy with that particular move to get the win. So with all these things, with tactics, watch videos on them, learn them. The puzzles that you do, especially on chess.com, I have found to be very, very useful for learning to see these tactics. I spend a minimum 20 minutes a day practicing puzzles, and every now and again you'll get one with attraction. On chess.com, you can actually go in and specify what types of puzzles you want to drill. So you can go in and say, I want to drill fork puzzles, or attraction, or removing the guard, or pins, or whatever it may be. You can actually select them, and there's hundreds of thousands of different puzzles that you can work on. So the key thing is that by drilling these puzzles, or familiarizing yourself with the tactic, it means then you can start to spot it within a game. Now, there's not always, that's the problem, is you can be playing a game, there's not always tactics. But you have to look around and say, is there a potential tactic? And the better players, the top players, not only manufacture their own tactics, they can also spot them very quickly when they occur. And as you improve, as you go along, you do start to see these things. And with that particular situation, I'll admit, I saw it when I saw it. I didn't plan for it. I was planning to get the rook across to cause problems up the side, but I didn't necessarily plan ahead for that. I just happened to spot it at the time. Hopefully, maybe when I'm better, I'll be able to engineer it and feel all proud. So there we are. Laws of attraction. Pulling a piece away from the part it was defending. So again, it could be argued as removing the guard, which is another tactic, and they're very similar. But regardless, it means sacking a piece and getting yourself in a nice, strong position. And in the case of this game, it put the king in the corner. Nobody puts baby in the corner. But in this game, baby king was put in the corner and checkmated. So as always, I hope that was useful to you. It's certainly helped me on my chess journey for noticing these sorts of tactics, and hopefully the knowledge is just gradually growing. So thank you so much. As always, please like, comment if you haven't already done so, subscribe, and see you on the next episode.